This is the story of a car so groundbreaking and unconventional that Guy Fieri changed his name in its honor. Before that, he was known as Steve Fieri. It's America's only mass-produced mid-engine car until next year. Perhaps the most 80s looking car ever built, and it might have caught on fire 1 or 2 times. Get your plastic body panels, blocky GM interiors, and fiberglass body kits ready, because this is everything you need to know to get up to speed on the Pontiac Fiero. Visionaries at General Motors have been trying to build a sports car like the Fiero for decades, but they were blocked at every turn. Back when Chevy was designing the Stingray Corvette, lead designer ZORA ARKUS-DUNTOV had plans for the car to be mid-engine, much like the European cars that inspired it. But GM squashed that idea. Shortly after that, John DeLorean was working on one Pontiac project that would take off the GTO. He was assisted by a young man named Hulky Aldi Kakti. This was the dude who would later lead the Fiero team. Guys, I'm really bad at pronouncing names. I'm doing a GM car, and I gotta say a dude's name that's really hard to pronounce. The young designers who thought up the Fiero concept were a new breed. They were scrappy and wanted to build some really cool stuff. Now this was a problem because the bigwigs at GM were a bunch of dinosaur squares who didn't really like building cool stuff. You see, by the late 70s, muscle cars were basically all gone, and GM management was content with sitting back and selling cars by virtue of being the biggest manufacturer in the world. That's called brand recognition. You know how Beats by Dre aren't even that good, but everyone buys them anyway? Brand recognition. Coasting on brand recognition was going pretty well for GM until overseas rivals like VW, Honda, and Toyota started building factories in the US before the US automakers were protected by tariffs. GM management was getting screwed. They were losing sales to foreign competitors, and their old doctrine wasn't gonna change that. It was time to build some new stuff, some cool new stuff. Maybe those guys down at Pontiac have some ideas. Maybe. Are you gonna finish your applesauce? No, you can have it. Where are we? We're at GM, we're making the cars. Oh. The team first pitched the Fiero as an Italian-inspired sports car with blistering performance to match an American stiletto worthy of sharing a garage with Ferraris, Lamborghinis, and Porsches. Sounds pretty sweet, right? Well, GM didn't think so. They didn't have the cash for that. GM management told them that they needed something fuel efficient. The gas crisis had taken its toll, and buyers wanted a car that would get good mileage. To lead the project, GM grabbed our friend Hulky and said, "Here, you do this now." Hulky's leadership style was unconventional within GM. It was typical for car engineers to send over blueprints only to have them sent back by the manufacturing guys with notes like, "This literally cannot be built with today's technology." And then a project would die. Hulky didn't want that. That would make Hulky angry. And you wouldn't like when Hulky's angry. Speaking of Hulky, how about Hulky smash that like button? For the first time at GM, the Fiero team would be a single group of car and manufacturing engineers working side by side. Management set the budget cap for the car's entire development at $400 million. Now that sounds like a lot, but in the auto manufacturing world, it's not. This tiny budget would be the source of every problem in the Fiero's lifespan. To save money on development, the Fiero would use pieces from GM's extensive parts catalog. The front suspension was borrowed from the Chevy Chevette, and the rear suspension was repurposed front suspension from the Pontiac Phoenix, mounted backwards. Originally, the Fiero was devised with an all-aluminum, high-compression V6, but because of their budget, that was out of the question. To get an engine, the team had to dive back into the parts bin like Scrooge McDuck. What they dragged out was a GM standby, the Iron Duke Inline 4. As the name suggests, the engine block and head were both made of iron. It had fairly low compression and didn't really like to be wrung out. Not exactly what you want in a sports car, but just because Hulky and the Fiero team had to borrow a few parts, don't think for a second that they weren't gonna try to innovate a little. The Fiero's space frame was a tubular chassis made of 280 separate pieces of steel, weighing in at just 600 pounds. What made the Fiero different though is that the bodywork was unstressed and made of a new material called Plastec. Oh, and I almost forgot. Up and down headlights, pop 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 up and down headlights. Finally, after 5 years of development, the Pontiac Fiero went on sale for the 1984 model year. Despite the less than ideal parts bin suspension, critics praised the Fiero's mid-engine balance, even saying that the car felt like it was on rails, which is like the best thing that journalists can think of to describe a car that handles well. The upgraded Fiero SE had stiffer springs and shocks, as well as sticky Goodyear Eagle GT tires. The Iron Duke engine was underpowered, to say the least, pumping out a paltry 92 horsepower and 134 Turks. However, the Iron Duke did deliver on the promise of good fuel economy with an independently confirmed 50 mile per gallon highway rating. That's insane. Most cars today can't do that, including hybrids. But the good mileage couldn't hide one of the Iron Duke's fatal flaws. In its stock configuration, the tall oil pan meant the engine sat too high in the engine bay, which dramatically raised the Fiero's center of gravity. To remedy this, the team engineered a new oil pan that was about an inch shorter. This solved the engine placement problem, but created a new one. The engine ran with less oil. Now, I'm no expert. Okay, but one thing I know about engines, they need oil. Now, this wasn't a problem if you kept up on regular maintenance. Every car burns a little bit of oil as you're driving around. But since the Fiero was already running at a deficit, once enough oil had burned away, the resulting friction created a ton of heat. Combine this with smaller problems like oil and coolant leaking onto the super hot exhaust header, and you have a recipe for engine fires.
Burning Fiero.
Auto Week magazine reported that roughly 20% of 1984 Fieros experienced an engine fire. I'm no mathematician, but 20% of your cars catching on fire is way too many of your cars catching on fire. I just want to point out that a car that kept catching on fire was named the Fiero, which is Italian for a car that catches on fire. In 1985, 10 years before Post Malone was born, the Fiero got the V6 engine it deserved, which allowed it to perform more closely to how it looked. No longer was the Fiero just a commuter, but a sportier commuter. The beefier 2.8 liter V6 made a decent 130 horsepower and was bolted and nutted to a 4-speed manual transmission. The next year, Pontiac released the Fiero GT. It had an upgraded Get Track design, Muncie built 5-speed power disc brakes at all 4 corners, thick diamond spoke wheels, dual exhaust, and completely revised bodywork that made the Fiero look like a little baby Ferrari. If your stepdad's name is Dwayne and his favorite band is Boston, this is his dream car. In 1987, GM finally recalled all those 84 Fieros that were catching fire. Pontiac had to repair 125,000 cars to make sure that none of them would catch fire again. Just as it was getting good, the large-scale recall cast the Fiero's reputation into the shadow of flames forever. The recall was just in time for the release of the revised 1988 Fiero GT. Instead of parts bin suspension, the GT finally had the setup the Fiero team had been fighting for since the beginning. The front had completely redesigned control arms that made it easier to steer, and in the rear was a super legit tri-link setup. The engine also received a balanced crank, which made it more efficient and gave it smoother power delivery. Unfortunately, the GT's final form wasn't enough. 1988 was the last year for Fiero production. Since then, the Fiero has experienced a rebirth from the ashes, Fiero to Phoenix, rising from the grave, not from the assembly line, but from the blood and sweat of enthusiasts all over the country. While some people remember the Fiero with engine fire memes and unfair stereotypes, it's important to acknowledge that the Fiero is easily one of GM's most groundbreaking cars. If they had given Pontiac enough money to build it correctly from the beginning, we would definitely remember it differently.
Okay, that was good.
Pop, 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 up and down headlights. Pop 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 up and down headlights. Pop, 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 pop.
I love you. I love you. I love you.